never forget the summer I turned 16 and got my first job at McDonald's. It seemed like easy money at the time. Flip burgers, work the fryer, cash out smiling customers. But I quickly realized the golden arches hid a darkness few saw coming. My first week started out normal enough. Training videos, orientation, learning how to work the ice cream machine. I was even excited to wear the uniform and hat. It made me feel so official, even if I was just a lonely crew member. Things took a turn when I was assigned to the overnight maintenance shift. My manager explained that I'd be cleaning and restocking while the store was closed. It was just me, the shift lead Lewis, and the night manager Crystal. She locked the front doors after the last customers left that first night. I didn't think much of it until I heard the deadbolts slam shut. Louise set me to work mopping floors and cleaning bathrooms. As the hours ticked by, the empty store started to give me the creeps. Motion sensor lights flickered on randomly, buzzing overhead before plunging me back into darkness. The ice machine growled and rumbled, punctuated by the echoing drips from leaky faucets. Around 3 a.m., I was restocking napkins when the drips and hums of the store were drowned out by a loud crash from the manager's office. I froze, listening intently. Silence, just as I convinced myself it was nothing. A blood-curdling scream pierced the quiet. I dropped the napkin bundles and ran towards the office. Crystal's name died on my lips as I stumbled upon a nightmare. Louis stood over her lifeless body, a crazed look in his eyes and a bloody knife in his hand. When he saw me, a sinister grin spread across his face. "You're just in time for the sacrifice," he sneered. Paralyzed by fear, I backed away slowly. Louis stalked towards me, knife raised, with my heart pounding against my ribs. I did the only thing I could. I turned and ran. The store that had seemed so harmless hours ago now felt like a terrifying funhouse. I raced through the darkened dining room, my shoes sticky on the unclean floor. Louis' deranged laughter echoed all around me as I darted down the hall to the crew room. Locking the door behind me, I grabbed my cell phone from my bag with fumbling fingers and dialed 911. "Hello, 911 emergency," the dispatcher answered. "Help, I'm being chased by a murderer at McDonald's," I whispered frantically. Before I could say another word, the flimsy door splintered open. Louise stood grinning madly, knife poised to strike. I screamed and dropped the phone, stumbling backwards until my shoulders hit the cool tiled wall. No way out. As Louis slashed the knife toward my chest, adrenaline kicked in. I grabbed his arm, stopping the blade inches from my flesh. We struggled, the knife's edge inching closer as I fought for my life. With one last burst of strength, I kneed Louis in the gut. He wheezed, and I shoved him to the floor. The knife skittered away into the darkness. Not looking back, I ran for the emergency exit, threw open the door, and tripped the alarm. The shrill siren wailed into the night as I escaped into the parking lot and sprinted until I reached the highway. The flashing lights of police cars rushed past me toward the McDonald's, but I just kept running and running, ready to never look back. I heard later that Louise was arrested and found to be completely deranged, rambling about demons in the freezer and ghosts in the ball pit. Turns out the graveyard shift at McDonald's really can drive you mad. After all, I still swear the fries smelled like flesh at the end of the night, under the heat lamps keeping watch until dawn. But maybe it was just in my head. These days, I stick to daylight and home cooking, because you never know what evil might be lurking behind those golden arches once the customers are gone. I never would have imagined my boring job at McDonald's could turn into a real-life horror story, but that's exactly what happened over the course of one terrifying night shift. It started out like any other evening. I clocked in around 5 p.m. to start my shift at the grill. As customers came through ordering burgers and fries, I fell into the usual rhythm of cooking patties and assembling Big Macs. Around 7:30 p.m., things slowed down. I took the opportunity to wipe down my station and refill the sauce bottles. My coworker Amy was working the drive-through window while my manager Vicky counted the cash registers up front. It was a Tuesday night, so there were only a handful of customers scattered among the booths and tables. I was rolling out more burger patties when I heard a loud crash followed by a blood-curdling scream from the dining room. Amy and I exchanged startled looks. That did not sound good. Before we could react, a terrified couple burst into the kitchen, yelling for us to lock the doors. "He's got a gun," the woman cried frantically. "He shot someone." My blood turned to ice. This couldn't be happening, I thought. Amy immediately hit the emergency lockdown button while I called 911 in a panicked state. Within minutes, we heard police sirens wailing in the distance. The next few hours were a waking nightmare. A deranged gunman had opened fire in the dining room, critically injuring 2 customers before barricading himself in the restroom once the police arrived. One blood-soaked man died on the scene after being shot in the chest. The cops evacuated everyone they could, but Amy and I were trapped in the kitchen. We huddled together in the corner, sobbing and shaking uncontrollably. All we could do was listen to the sickening shouts of the cornered killer and pray the police could neutralize the threat before he came for us next. After what felt like an eternity, we heard 3 loud bangs, gunshots from within the restroom. The man had turned the gun on himself rather than face arrest. Just like that, the tense standoff was over. When armed officers finally entered the kitchen, Amy and I broke down in relief and despair. We were physically unharmed, but scarred mentally. Nothing could ever erase the trauma of being hunted by a homicidal stranger in the very restaurant we worked every day. In the aftermath, I learned that the deranged customer had no ties to McDonald's. He was just a deeply troubled man who snapped violently. But knowing that didn't make me feel any safer returning to work once we reopened. For weeks, I would flinch whenever the front door chimed, half expecting to see a loaded gun instead of a smiling customer. The cooking noises from the grill started to resemble distant gunfire in my mind. Before long, I couldn't take it anymore. The post-traumatic stress had ruined the place for me. I decided to quit, both for my peace of mind and out of respect for the innocent man whose life was stolen right at the order counter. The carnage I witnessed was too much to allow me to blithely flip burgers and go on like nothing happened. My managers and the franchise owner completely understood. In fact, several employees ended up leaving that location for similar reasons. They offered us transfers or references for other jobs, along with free counseling services to cope with the tragedy. The McDonald's remained closed for 2 weeks, while grief counselors came in to speak with everyone. When it reopened, they hung a memorial plaque for the customer who lost his life that awful night. Extra security guards and cameras were also added to help us feel safe again, even if it was just an illusion. Nothing could undo the permanent stain the killings left on our workplace. It's been a few years now, but not a day goes by that I don't think back to that terrifying shift. The sounds of screams and gunshots haunted me for months afterward. I took a less public job doing warehouse work where I don't have to interact with unpredictable strangers. It pays the bills, and more importantly, I feel at ease. The McDonald's massacre taught me that evil can invade anywhere, even the most ordinary places. I learned firsthand that life can turn on a dime from mundane to murderous in a split second. Surviving the horror created a darkness in me that will never completely fade, but it also gave me a newfound appreciation for each day I'm still breathing. Working the late-night shift at McDonald's was always kind of creepy. The empty dining room, harsh fluorescent lights, and occasional weird customer just gave me the chills. But I never could have imagined that taking this job to save up for college would put me face to face with a dangerous stalker. It started out slowly, just an ordinary guy coming through the drive-thru every few nights. He was older, maybe mid-40s, with greasy hair and rumpled clothes. He'd order a Big Mac or quarter pounder, nothing out of the ordinary. But he always requested a cup for water. which meant he was expecting me to come out and bring it to his car. I didn't think much of it at first, but over the next few weeks, he kept coming back and would only go through the drive-thru when I was working. He'd park and wait for me to bring his water, then try to make uncomfortable small talk. "How's your night going?" he'd ask with an unsettling grin. "Or this place sure is empty late at night, huh?" My co-workers Ashley and DeMarcus started to notice how fixated on me this customer seemed. "That guy gives me the creeps," Ashley whispered to me one night. "He only ever comes here when you're working. It's like he's watching your schedule." She was right. It was too much of a coincidence that he only came on my shifts. DeMarcus offered to walk me to my car when we closed, which provided some comfort. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this man was specifically seeking me out. One night, as I handed the man his water, he grabbed my wrist and said gruffly, "You know, you're a very beautiful young lady." I froze in shock and fear until he let go, then rushed back inside. My hands shaking so bad I spilled the drinks I was carrying. My manager kicked him out that night when I explained what happened. Over the next week, I didn't see the creepy customer again and started to breathe easier. But when I got off work at midnight on Friday, I noticed a beat-up gray sedan parked by the side of the restaurant. It was him. Heart pounding, I raced to my car, terrified he was waiting to ambush me. Peeling out of the lot, I took a winding route home in case he tried to follow. I drove past the same gray sedan parked along my block. I called the police to make a report, but with no direct threats or harm done, they said there wasn't much they could do. So my dad came over and slept on my couch until we could install security cameras and change the locks. For weeks, I barely slept and jumped at every little noise. One night, walking to my car after work, I noticed the man lingering down the block just watching me. I sprinted the rest of the way and locked the doors. As I sped off, I saw him taking photos of me leaving. Desperate for help, I went back to the McDonald's manager and confided everything. This man knew where I worked and lived. She was horrified and immediately told me to take a paid leave of absence while we figured out next steps. She even had her husband discreetly follow the man after work to get his license plate number. Turned out he was from the next town over, but had a history of stalking young women. With the evidence my manager gathered, the police finally agreed to send a warning. We even hired a private security guard for the parking lot in case he returned. Thankfully, these measures seemed to work. The man never came back to McDonald's or my home after that. The few weeks of constantly looking over my shoulder took a toll, though. I jumped at the slightest sound for months after. And even now, years later, I take all kinds of precautions. Carrying pepper spray, covering up my name tag, and keeping my address totally private. You just never know what kind of depraved person might fixate on you. So I learned the hard way to always be alert and never assume you're safe, even just going to and from an ordinary job. Staying vigilant is the only way I've found to keep the darkness at bay. I never would have guessed that working the drive-thru window at McDonald's could lead to me having a stalker. But that's the creepy situation I found myself in last year that still gives me chills when I think back on it. It all began on a regular weekday shift. We were in the midst of a slammed lunch rush with a constant stream of hungry customers wrapping around the building. I was focused on taking orders and money as quickly as possible to keep the line moving. That's when I heard a man's voice that made me pause.
"Hey, beautiful, what time do you get off?"
I looked up, expecting to see one of the regular truckers who'd occasionally flirt. But the driver staring back at me was a complete stranger. He looked to be in his 40s, with greasy hair and eerie eyes. I'm not sure. Have a great day, I mumbled, wanting him to move along. I didn't think much more about the uncomfortable interaction at first. But then he showed up again the very next day. "So we meet again," he said with an unsettling grin. He had the same order as the day before. It was clear he was back for me, not the food. I forced a polite smile and got him on his way as fast as possible. Over the next week, the man continued coming through the drive-thru multiple times a day, always going straight to my window. Even if there were shorter lines, he'd ignore them just to talk to me. My managers noticed him too, and could tell I felt harassed. But they said there was little we could do since he hadn't directly threatened me or anything like that. Soon, he began asking personal questions between his order and leering at me. "You're so gorgeous. Why don't we hang out after your shift?" he suggested with a sleazy look. I lied and told him I had a boyfriend to try and get him to back off. The creepy comments kept coming every time he showed up. It got so bad that other customers even complained about how uncomfortable it seemed. But when my manager confronted him, he swore he only wanted to be friends with me. Unfortunately, it didn't end there. He started following me out to my car after closing shifts, saying he just wanted to walk me safely to the parking lot. One time he even showed up right as I was leaving my house, claiming he just happened to be in the neighborhood. By then, it was obvious I had a full-blown stalker on my hands. The final straw came when he grabbed my arm forcefully through the drive-thru window one night, refusing to let go until I agreed to go out with him. I finally called the police and told them everything that had been happening. They arrested him in the McDonald's parking lot the next day for harassment and stalking charges. Thankfully, I was able to get a restraining order to keep him away from me and my workplace. The whole terrifying experience left me paranoid and scarred. I felt anxious leaving the house alone for weeks after, worried I might see his face appear out of the darkness. Although the cops reassured me he was locked up, I couldn't help glancing over my shoulder everywhere I went. It took a long time before I could feel totally comfortable working the drive-thru again. Now, whenever a car just sits there without ordering, my heart starts racing, wondering if it might be him. Rationally, I know he can't hurt me anymore, but the trauma of having a stalker at my minimum wage job still lingers no matter how much time passes. I'm just grateful I took action before things escalated even further. While I never expected to be harassed at work, I learned that creeps can show up anywhere. All you can do is trust your instincts and refuse to be silent when someone makes you feel threatened or scared. Looking back, I'm proud I found the courage to stand up to my stalker. The experience made me stronger in ways I never could have predicted when I first saw him staring through the drive-thru window a year ago.